Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. I learned something, or realized again, something of the enthusiasm that I'm imparting to the students. When we started the year, we were teaching the pre-Greeks. We were teaching about the Persians and the Assyrians and Babylonians and all that stuff, so that they would understand what happens when Greece arises and Persia attacks Greece. So they had to understand that Persia came from somewhere too, and before Persia was Babylonian, the Assyrians and all this. And Cuman made enthusiastic comments. He's like, the Assyrians kill everybody. Nobody can beat the Assyrians, right? And then the next day we do the part about where they sack Nineveh and Assyria falls and whatever. And then later we are studying Egypt, and he's talking about how awesome the Egyptian army is, and I said, okay, recess. And everybody goes out to recess, and as he's running out, he says, when we come back, we're going to learn more about Egypt, which will be awesome! And he screams as he runs out the door, right? And then later we learn how Egypt fell under the influence of the Greeks, and the Greeks admired Egypt a bit, but Egypt was gone under Greek hegemony. And so then we learn about the Greeks and the Spartans, and he says Athens is awesome. They beat everybody. They beat the Persian Empire, right? Fine. Now we go into the golden age of Athens, where Athens falls in the Peloponnesian War against Sparta. Oh man, every time he generalizes the greatness of a society, it falls. Then we talk about Rome. Oh, Rome falls. Then we talk about Spain, the Spanish Armada. Spain falls. Then we talk about Britain. Britain fell. Here we have, you know, the end of his general knowledge. But today is when we began talking about Britain. He doesn't know about the fall of Britain very much really. The kids, though, are learning now about the rise of Britain. And I've decided to do this so that I can give them a little bit of information about the United States. Now, there's no way to skip over the Dark Ages or Rome. We are actually going to study Rome in detail, but we're watching videos about Britain, because I just don't have that many videos about Rome, and I have a superb video series on Britain on 5 discs called A History of Britain, I think done by the BBC, that starts back in the Stone Age. So it's a very broad view of history. We actually get to review the birth of agriculture and hunting and gathering and stuff like that, and the Iron Age, and all this stuff gets reviewed in this video series. So we're starting Britain as we're studying Rome right now. They already know the Rome and the Dark Age and the rise of science and the Renaissance, because we had to do that already. Just a general overview for science, because there's not much science to study in the ancient world. You have to get right to Copernicus pretty quick. Well, I mean, we spent months in Greece, but eventually you have to go to Copernicus. The point is that Cuman has been enthusiastic, and the other kids have been generally quite enthralled by the lessons on each culture we come to. And they generally project the grandioseness of the culture, because we study the culture when it was effective and stuff, and what happened to it afterwards and stuff. And they keep learning the lesson over and over, but it's interesting that if you teach them in the right way, you teach them the things that are interesting, you don't bore them with politically correct details about the type of food these people ate or whatever. Now, we definitely told them the type of food the Spartans ate, because it characterizes them. And then we told them the type of food that the Egyptians ate, namely a lot of grain, because they had the Nile River growing stuff for them. But other than that, you don't need to go into detail, which multicultural people will tell in detail. They'll have the kids go over the diet of the ancient Chinese, and they'll have them try rice one day in class and different crap like that. Stuff that's completely irrelevant. Now, Spartan black soup, which is one of the only recipes that survives from the ancient world, is relevant to tell the kids. You know, a bunch of radishes and some onions diced up, plus 1 part pig blood and 1 part vinegar wine. Boil for an hour and cool and enjoy. Ugh. Pig's blood? Turnips and onions? That's relevant. Anyways, I say the diet part's not relevant, because it generally isn't, but that is an exception. Teach them things that are interesting to them on some level. They don't really understand what war is, do they? But they do know what it means for an army to take over a city. Not really. Not really. But they can understand empires. They can understand one country taking over another in some way. And later on, when they get older, they really start to appreciate what that really means for one culture to supplant another. But they can only get to the point of really appreciating that if they've got this basic layer in there first. And my point is that every single society I've introduced them to, from the Assyrians to the Babylonians, to the Persians, to the Egyptians, to the Greeks, to the Romans, to the hegemony of Islam in the Middle East during Europe's Dark Age, to the hegemony of Spain after it drove the Muslims out of Spain in 1492 at the end of the 700 Years' War, to the hegemony of Britain, which we are just now beginning to study by studying Iron Age Britain on the videos. Point is, they are into and have a deep understanding of all these cultures that I didn't learn about until I got into college and had to educate myself on, because no one's teaching this stuff. They've got a deep understanding of it that's going to get deeper every single year. Funny thing the kids brought up today in class. They said we don't really talk very much about the Greeks anymore, and I said, well, at the beginning of next year we're going to spend the first 3 or 4 months on the Greeks. And they are, well, Cuman was like, that's awesome, I'd love to go over the Greek stuff again, and Kaden was like, that'll be cool. So we'll see what happens.